morning. Can you hear me? How's everybody? It's great to see you all. Thanks for joining us. This is going to be a really fun exploratory session today. Campus sustainability, the next 10 years. Fitting because we're celebrating our AASHE 10-year anniversary this year. I'm really pleased to have this panel with me that I'm going to introduce you to. First, I'd like to introduce you to Jay Antle, who is a professor at Johnson County Community College and the executive director of the college's Sustainability Center. He moderates the monthly National Community College Sustainability Webinar Series. He currently lives in Lawrence, Kansas, and is an avid hiker and storm chaser. He's also a mediocre long-distance runner with 29 half marathons to his credit, and he survived the last 3 Chicago marathons, which is impressive, I might add.
Sort of survived.
Welcome, Jay. Woo! We also have Harold Glasser from Western Michigan University with us. Harold's work explores how individuals, organizations, and societies make choices that affect the environment, which in turn affects them. He focuses on root causes, why, and how some individuals, organizations, and societies monitor, understand, and learn how to drastically reduce these ecocultural impacts effectively, and others do not. The overarching goal is to understand and help bridge the gap between stated widespread desire to improve quality of life for all while restoring the environment and present-day unsustainable actions, lifestyles, and policies. Welcome, Harold.
Thank you.
Ciannat Howitt from Emory University is also here with us this morning. Ciannat oversees sustainability initiatives for a large healthcare network and a private university, a role that she has filled for 9.5 years. Her background is as a public interest environmental lawyer, and she has worked in the nonprofit, governmental, private, and now academic sectors for over 25 years. Welcome, Ciannat. Thank you. We also have Julie Newman from MIT with us this morning. Julie is in the midst of founding her 3rd Office of Sustainability. She has had the opportunity to found an office within a public university, a private Ivy, and now a technological institute. She remains keenly interested in a model of collaborative leadership for sustainability, and she believes that that is essential, an essential construct that our field must embrace to succeed. In 2004, she launched the Northeast Campus Sustainability Consortium, which is still active today, and is involved with a variety of local and international collaboratives. Julie is determined to ensure that the whole of our efforts is greater than the sum of the parts. Welcome, Julie. And I'm realizing, I feel like I'm really tired of hearing my own voice. I'm sure some of you are as well. But for those of you that don't know me, I am Meghan Zahnsier. I'm the executive director of AASHE, and pleased to be with you here this morning. So we're going to have a conversation. What's super fun is I get to sit down. So I'm thrilled about that. We're going to start with a little bit of a retrospective on where we've been. With this talented group of folks we have on stage, we're going to hear from their perspectives as to where we've been and what we've learned, as well as where we're going. So I want to start out with a question, and maybe, Julie, I'll look right to you. Given your lengthy experience in the field, what do you think are the most notable accomplishments for our field from the past decade?
Oh, so many. I'm going to just say a couple, and I'll defer to my colleagues here. I mean, I think the looking around today and just being here this couple of days, I think the AASHE's attendance is certainly one indicator of success. And I'm also involved internationally, so I've seen actually the same growth both at the national level and at the international level. So I think that's fabulous. I mean, I was saying to somebody yesterday when I was at Ball State, I see Bob in the field, I think in 1996, 97, we knew everybody in the room at that point, or maybe 75% of the people at that point. Now here I know maybe 75 people as opposed to 75% of the people. So I think 2 pieces. One is the relationships we've built over time, I think are essential for the success of this field so that we continue to do that, whether it's relationships we've built in the past or the new relationships that people are building. I think the number of, so just going back to your question, I think the number of positions clearly that exists, and I was just reviewing the AASHE survey that you guys put out recently, is phenomenal. The institutional commitments and both the priorities at many of the levels from presidential on down at many of our institutions are just amazing. The last piece I want to add is just the level of sophistication as how we go about conducting our work has really evolved, and I hope part of our role is to push it even further from today's panel.
Thank you, Julie. Jay, your perspective, you've been at a community college for a number of years in Kansas. What are your thoughts on our notable accomplishments for the past 10 years?
Well, first of all, I'm having to resist breaking out into verses of Freebird right now. Auditorium.
Don't hold back.
This is a tough crowd. I just dropped a Leonard Skinner reference.
Everybody's
and no
tired,
one,
I think.
Thank you. Happy to greet you from the land of Kansas, home of the Koch brothers, and so it's an interesting environment that we're in there. But I guess what I would say is that higher education sustainability has created a set of expectations. There are certain things, at least at most programs, most universities, you no longer have to justify everything. Most universities do recycling to some degree. Most universities will at least tolerate some conversations about greenhouse gas emissions and carbon footprinting and water footprinting. None of these things are enough, but they are at least now an expectation on the part of alumni. They're an expectation on the part of our students, perhaps most importantly. At my institution, my board of trustees is fairly conservative, but they know what their kids want. They know what their sons and daughters want. And so those basic expectations give us some space to operate. And so I think, while it's not nearly enough, we have at least gotten to the place where certain things are kind of a given.
Thank you, Jay. Ciannat, your thoughts on accomplishments from the past decade?
Yeah, well, like Julie, I think probably the singular most notable accomplishment is this community. The other thing I would note is over the past 10 years, there's been a level of transparency and truth-telling that wasn't there before. And what I mean by that is higher education institutions, when they talked about impact on future generations or impacts to the local or global community, they were largely talking in positive terms. We are doing cutting edge research, we are graduating the best and brightest, we're doing this amazing community outreach, which was all true and is all true. But this whole operational piece, the fact that we're running these mini cities that have lots of impacts to future generations and our local and our global communities that are not positive, that's what sustainability forced and allowed our institutions to own up to and to embrace. And I know at my institution, when we started this, a few people in the steam plant knew our energy impacts. And now, we have real-time monitors and all that stuff that all of us have. And I think it's only when our institutions own up to and embrace those not so positive impacts that then they have the moral obligation to act.
Thank you, Ciannat. Harold, your thoughts?
It's a great question, and it's a big question. And I think that's really part of what this 10 years has been about, is that we're starting to ask the big, the deep, the important questions. So I think we're starting to realize that sustainability is about improving quality of life for all. And that's Ciannat's great point. It's about all of you, and it's about what all of us do. And I think we've realized that it's not simply about reorienting what we do in higher education. It's about reimagining what higher education is about. It's returning to the roots of learning. It's about leveraging our potential for innovation and creativity and collaboration and really deep, meaningful learning to improve everyone's quality of life. And when we say quality of life for all, I think we're realizing it's not just about us as humans. It's about all life. It's about flourishing. It's about ecosystem services. And it's about ecosystem services not just for what they do for us, but simply for life. And that's really about what it means to realize our potential as Homo sapiens sapiens. We call ourselves man, which we shouldn't in the first place, but man, the wise. So there's that implication that we're self-reflective, and now we have to earn it. And I think that's what it's about.
And have you seen that a clear understanding or a greater understanding of that interconnectedness, do you think, from where we are now and where we were 10 years ago?
I think that when we create the space for the deep and difficult and open conversations like you're doing now, I think all of us start to see it. And then we start to realize that it's what we do, what we model every single day, all the decisions we make.
Right.
And I think that's, some of the original work I did 15 years ago was on this thing called the Campus Sustainability Assessment Project, and that led to what we now have with AASHE. And it's about that process. It's not about gaming the system, because we all learn how to game the system and get a gold, and one person's gotten, one organization, institution has gotten a platinum. But it's about the process that happens when we take stars really seriously. It's about the conversations that happen. It's about the cross-institutional discussion. And then it's about the deep questions of it gets to the roots of what does it mean to be a part of a higher education institution? What are we really here for?
Yeah, thanks, Harold. Well, it's exciting and joyful, really, to think back about how far we've come over the past 10 years. I think in imagining the future that we want to achieve, it's critical for us to understand our missteps, perhaps lessons learned. So I'm curious, and Julie, you often refer to your experiences as 3 different startups. Yeah. So what would you say, what are our biggest missteps as a movement from the past 10 years?
And I'm going to talk about this as missteps in a cautious way, of course, because I think it's still happening today. And I can't wait to hear your guys' response to this as well. I think my biggest reflection is that I think we're developing it now, but 10, 20 years ago, we still weren't using enough of the language around organizational transformation tied to our intention. And it was much easier to focus on the more incremental approaches, if you will, around cups and water bottles and recycling. So I think we got stereotyped too early on and almost too deeply to actually move beyond that. No, don't get me wrong. I understand we need incremental steps to make change, but I think there was too early latching on to that as the end all be all. But as we all know, that's really working around the margins. And so I don't know if I would call it a misstep as much as making sure that we're shifting from that focus more towards how do we shift the organization, which is hard, it's messy, it's political, it's all of those things. And you can even see it by the case studies that we still do today. You need to celebrate the small victories. I get that, and I'm for that. And at the same time, we need to truly understand what those underlying organizational, David Orr alluded to it, last night, and has for 20 years, right? In terms of what are the true underlying manifestations of what we need? What is the manifestation of the organization that is truly going to embrace, manifest, succeed at being sustainable? And how do you ensure that it's within an agile institution that continues to be, flexible and adaptable and doesn't fail over time? And even we were talking about this somewhere along the way in the past 48 hours. We have a shared economy now, right? That's a new term. That did not exist 20 years ago when we were rethinking transportation systems. So how do we continue to stay within the current, make our intentions meet the new current constructs along the way? So as you can imagine, I could go on and on with
Sure.
each new piece. But my last piece I'll say is, now that I'm starting a new one, I am trying to figure out what is the right foundation, and we'll get into this in the next 10 years, that has to be laid at every organization. How fast can one do it? How fast can you move people to that place to then really think about next generation sustainability? So Stay tuned.
Yeah. A thought to add, and I'll ask you folks about missteps as well, or lessons learned. I was having a conversation even with someone this morning, and in terms of the past decade, even the term sustainability is something that has evolved, and the understanding of it. So many times, and for me in my life, the dog park is a really good barometer as to the understanding of sustainability. When people are saying, what do you do? And I say, oh, sustainability. And there's, sometimes, and then other times a real receptivity. And it's interesting, our theme this year of the conference is transforming sustainability education. And yet, Julie, to your point, there's such an attachment to the operational aspects of campus sustainability.
Yes.
And how interesting, our whole movement is about education.
Right.
And the fact that it is, I don't see it as a misstep, but sort of an interesting observation that the intent, really the fundamental point of higher education has sort of been secondary in terms of the sustainability part. So I'm sort of
Thank you for saying
realizing
that.
that,
Yeah, that's helpful
hearing
to
from you.
articulate.
Yeah. Other thoughts?
Well, I think we've fundamentally, a little background, of course, I'm an environmental historian by training. And at a community college, of course, we have gen ed courses. We also have a lot of vocational technical courses. And when we started all of this back in the community college world in 08 and 09, we were going to be part of the Green New Deal, right? That was the Van Jones. And we were going to be launching, there were hundreds of millions of dollars for green workforce training programs. And we all set these programs up, and we were training people to put solar panels on roofs and do energy efficiency work. And then Congress flipped, and there was no carbon tax. And so lots of community colleges that did the work they were told to do, had the funding to do, created programs. And unless you are in states where there are the proper utility incentives at the state level, those programs died. And so I think we underestimated the political opposition, where it would come from, the power of entrenched interests, and the power of entrenched interests inside our own institutions. Silos. I mean, at the end of the day, despite rhetoric from the right, institutions of higher ed are amazingly conservative institutions. And we are all beating our heads against silos all the time. And talk about systems that don't work. The Higher Learning Commission, which is the regional accreditation agency for the Midwest, is doubling down on silos and your credentials in a certain field to be able to teach it. So they are frustrating the interdisciplinarity that we actually need to get to. So I think those are some things I'd throw out there.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, when I think about gaps, a couple things come to mind for me. First, I would say the social equity piece. We talk so often about the three-legged stool of sustainability, and I think all too often it's sort of a wobbly stool because we're not necessarily devoting the amount of resources, time, energy, and attention to the social justice part. And I know probably a lot of people saw the research out of the Pew Center showing that a child born into poverty in certain areas of the United States has a better chance of moving out of poverty if born in what we call developing countries. And so our universities have to get into businesses they don't want to be in, but we've got to move them there. They've got to be thinking about housing and healthcare and education and transportation in a much bigger, much more deliberate way if we're really going to address that social equity piece. The second thing, which I don't think is a gap, but it's definitely what we haven't done yet, but we'll do. And that is that we have spent the last decade, I think rightly, focusing on creating this community of change agents. And what now we need is for our institutions to be change agents. And what I hear too often is institutions saying, we're graduating sustainability leaders. That's great. We've got to do that. But I think that's putting too much on the students and recent grads, and we don't have decades to wait. So right now, our institutions themselves have the prestige, the power, the money, and the privilege. And have to see that it comes with a price, an obligation to be leaders for the global sustainability transformation. And I love that that's AASHE's mission. The mission is not to have green campuses. The mission is global sustainability transformation that is led by our higher ed institutions. And I really think unless we make that our laser focus, then what we're going to end up with is another decade of fabulous platinum institutions, but we won't have gotten to what our goal really is.
Right. Thank you for saying that, Ciannat. Harold.
I think, I'm going to sort of tack on to what Ciannat's saying. There's a famous story about the entrance exam for the insane asylum. It's doing the same thing over and over and over again, thinking that it's going to yield a different result the next time. And so we've done a beautiful job, focusing on being less unsustainable. And we've done a horribly poor job about really creating the transformative change. And I think that's sort of, one thing about the view towards the future. But I think we get stuck in this sense of our short lifetimes, on planet Earth. And there's a really long view that we need to take into account here. higher education as we know it, so-called higher education, it's been around for maybe 500 years, and we've done a tremendously, fantastic job in the generation of data, information, and knowledge. It's unimaginable, right? We now have these Dick Tracy things, that the watches that we imagined, we now have, right?
Do you all know who Dick Tracy was?
Search on your phone, right? And where we've really not even begun in terms of the potential of higher education is thinking about meaning, understanding, and wisdom. And I think it's what David Orr, was alluding to yesterday, but he really never used the word love. And although he embodies it, in many ways. And I think that's why when we look out here, there's you, and you're here actually because you love life, you love your kids, you love your neighbors, you love your community. Maybe you love the higher education institution you're a part of, maybe not sometimes. But it's about, us really learning to help create that dance in our institution, which really helps that transformative change, balls start rolling down the hill. And I think, just to tie back to your first question, if you read Paul Hawkins' book, Blessed Unrest, Paul's a friend of mine. When it first came out, I was like, this is kind of really not happening. And then I look out, and I see you, and I went to a bunch of the sessions, and I talked to people at the free time we have, and it is happening, and you are creating it, and it's incredible to see.
Yeah. Jay, you have a thought?
Well, this is going to be unusual coming from me, but let's talk about love a little bit. If you think back to the end of the Cold War, if you're a music fan, you might remember Sting's first solo album. There was a song on it called Russians. And basically the gist of that song was, I hope the Russians love their children too. And at the end of the day, and we want to be optimistic here, at the end of the day, I do think that storytelling and data and passionate people are going to win the day. I'm not sure we're going to win, but it's going to win the day. And so my hope is that we're the people who help make that happen, and that we convince the Koch brothers that they love their children too.
That's a great point, Jay. Thank you for sharing that. A couple of other thoughts just as we're looking backwards and then transitioning toward this future that we're envisioning. Kina, you were really talking about the end goal, like looking beyond just our built environment on the campus that we go and work on every single day. And it's interesting because AASHE, we just put together this value proposition, and it says just that. This isn't just about the campuses. This is ultimately about making sure that students, every single student, is graduating equipped with the knowledge they need to address and incorporate sustainability solutions in any career path they choose. Right. And in order to do that, that's going to take partnerships with so many different people and an understanding on campus too of how to achieve that, which is just another point before we transition here to the future. I think the connections that need to be made and strengthened between the communication staff on college campuses and the sustainability team to be able to celebrate these successes, to get people excited, to get people to love the sustainability aspects of their campus. I think that's part of the future. So let's move there. So, Julie, did you want to add?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Moving on to the future. So we're thinking about where we've come, what we've learned. Now what do we want to achieve in the next 10 years? Right? Each of you have a little bit of a different perspective, I think, but are coming from a similar place. Harold, let's start with you. What do you want to achieve in the next 10 years? Or the movement, really, not just you.
Well, it just made me think of the Toyota Mirai, their new hydrogen car came out, and they're using the theme of Back to the Future. So check it out on your phone sometime. I think what I'm trying to think about now is that, we're starting to talk more seriously about the education and educational aspects. And really what I think we're talking about is really deep learning, tapping into our human potential for learning. And that's where higher education institutions can play a role. But mostly when we hear these conversations, it's on content. Sort of how do we adjust our content? And I do a lot of work on core competencies and learning for sustainability. But when we talk about that, we oftentimes leave out the role of pedagogy, and we leave out the role of modeling. So how do we model sustainability in all aspects of what we do? Recent research has come out, we now have bacteria in our gut that actually send signals to our brain to encourage us to eat the things that are good for them, but not necessarily good for us. So I think what we really need to embrace is the power and complexity of our neurobiology. How do we actually really create the transformative change, and what are the deep levers, that Janella Meadows talked about? So what we're trying to do as an example is work out the vision of something I'm calling a community sustainability incubator. So how do we shift what the institution does in terms of how resources are allocated, but how we reimagine our potential, real world problem solving for people and the planet, where our job is to not have these disciplines, although we need disciplinary training, but we need to move out of those silos. The world has problems and we still have departments and disciplines. And so one way to do that is through this community sustainability incubator, but it doesn't just stop at the university. The boundaries are much more permeable. It includes other universities and colleges and community colleges. It includes other institutions, formal, non-formal, informal, where learning is at the core of what they do, and creating a physical space that models sustainability in all its aspects. So the idea of the 12th or 13th century cathedral, when you walk into that space, your notion of what it means to be human changes simply because of that space which runs on the sun and is made of the most significant materials that Earth offers us, with the passion and love that went into constructing it.
Over many generations with those cathedrals.
Exactly.
Many generations.
And we need to be creating those kinds of spaces.
Yeah.
So the idea that I try to lay out, Andrew Carnegie created that in the United States. He created that with the public library. And we need to think about our institutions as creating those spaces that act as community sustainability incubators and move into that realm of modeling sustainability in all aspects of what we do, and create an open invitation for everyone to come and to participate and roll up their sleeves and start working.
Sounds fantastic. Ciannat, given your experience in a number of different sectors in addition to higher education, what do you think about in terms of the next 10 years?
Well, I love that image. And one of the things that I think is great about where we are right now is that higher education is in a bit of an identity crisis. There are all these disruptive factors, and people have talked about them for the past several days, that are leaving higher ed thinking, what are we and what's our role in the next 10 years? That is good news for us, I think. Because for too long, I think higher ed has seen itself as able to sort of sit back, we discover, we create knowledge and distribute it. That's not the active role. There you're not being the change agent, right? So what we have to say is to ourselves every day, we're about this global transformation in the world, people. We are not about greening higher ed. In fact, the vision that haunts me, quite honestly, is thinking of our universities and colleges as a sort of oasis of privilege, a bunch of them across the United States, these little green nodes. And they literally have gates most of the time, right? Talk about a gated community, limited access. We're really green right inside there. That cannot be our next 10 years, and it will not be our next 10 years. And I have a young child, and people often say, gosh, given the work you do, how did you have a child, right? You must be so afraid. And I am fearless. And it is because I have such confidence in our community, and I have such confidence that higher ed can be this, and you see it already, moving from just the intellectual, that guardian, gatherer of knowledge, to instead being that moral agent, that emotional, social creature. And we need to feed that as much as we can. So that's what's going to happen in the next 10 years.
And hope is infectious, right? So that
well, and it's not a hope ungrounded.
Yeah.
I'm not really a person of faith in that way, but I have faith in you, right?
Wonderful. Thank you, Ciannat. Jay.
I have to follow that. Yes. So let's look at the community college again. So because of our vocational and technical career programs, we have lots of students who come to us not quite knowing what they want to do or how to get there. They want to avoid They come from, they want to avoid debt loads because they're already coming from disadvantaged backgrounds. And I think what the next 10 years can do for those students at community colleges is to help provide a calling and not just a career. I think sometimes in this country we tend to look down on community colleges, we tend to look down upon vocational technical training, and we do that at our peril. And we do that as a disservice to those students who come to us who are going to go to their restaurant and they're going to say, what's this? I heard about this green restaurant certification. We should be doing this. We should transform this. It'll be good for our bottom line, good for the planet, good for our city's waste stream. And so I think at the community college level, we need to make sure that we are integrating sustainability into all of these areas so that these students are not just getting a certificate or a job. They're going to be taking a certain kind of passion and mission with them when they go to those jobs. And one thing I'll also add, which is going to leave the community college behind completely, and this is going to be a little bit of a downer, but it really necessarily shouldn't be. Over the next 10 years, we have got to get a hell of a lot better at bearing witness. No matter what we do, we're going to lose a lot in terms of the natural systems, the natural world that we have all grown up with. And I think we have to get better at documenting that, training our students to notice it, and so that when we're telling our stories, those stories have that power. David Orr talked about tragedy last night. Tragedy is important. The narrative's important. And I think we need to get better at bearing witness.
Thank you, Jay. Julie, your thoughts?
Such good answers. Well, we need more conversations like this in future meetings for sure. I'm going to have a couple parts for you. One I think is I'm going to speak to dignity, partnership, research, and lifelong learning. And the dignity piece is, now I've been in this field for quite some time, and it's still a field where you go to a table with high-level administrators or the most senior faculty, and you, for the most part, still need to, it's extremely humbling still. It's still, because I think we've been tied so operationally, there are exceptions to this, it's been so operationally focused back to what you said earlier in terms of where we started from, it's still not perceived as a rigorous field, if you will. I think there are exceptions, and I think there's good research and publications, don't get me wrong, that's as part of contributing to that as well. But I think we have in the next 10 years need to raise the bar on that, need to figure out how to do that, because this is very difficult work. Working with people and organizations and systems, this transformational work we do is hard, but it's fabulous and it's rewarding and everything that came before my statement. So that's one piece. I think we need greater partnerships. This is not in order, by the way. It's not unlike what you guys announced yesterday. I think that was a very important step forward. I know I'm a proponent of collaborative leadership, but I think we need to continue to provide that transparency and rethink our partnerships. We're very good about coming together. We're very good about exchanging best practices, building relationships, but I'm convinced there's one more step, multiple steps further we can go with that, so we can figure out how to expedite one another better, more honestly share what's working, what's not working, and having these deeper conversations. The other piece of partnerships is with the city. I think many of us have had exchanges with folks in the USDN. So here we are in the same city, in the same hotel, possibly one room over from sustainability directors within many of our own cities, and we're still meeting separately. It's remarkable to me, again, to nobody's fault, but we need to break down not only the silos within the Institute, but these silos across systems. And I work with an institute, which is no secret. We receive money from somebody in Kansas, and so there are numerous partnerships with institutes and industry, and it's really opened my eyes to, not on that front, but on the needing to build new relationships with, needing to engage industry, needing to engage the private sector. And I recognize the controversy in that, but higher education alone, I feel needs to, will not necessarily solve these problems alone, but we need to figure out how to raise above some of our challenges and find those appropriate partnerships at that level. My last two pieces are research, I think alluded to in previous statements, but I keep wanting to know, okay, if somebody did this, myself included, do I have data to demonstrate that it failed, it succeeded, how can I share that? And we need to much more complex, rich, accessible, open source data moving forward that enables our faculty to do research, enables us to think differently, to provide greater transparency. And I think STARS has been the perfect jumping off point for that. And now we have to figure out, where do we go from here, where it's just beyond annual. We're still looking backwards from our data. We still have state of the record data, as we call it at MIT. We're still looking backwards. We need to figure out how to look in real time, how to project forward, how to think in more complex systems. And the last piece I'm a real big proponent of, and I'm starting to figure out how to take this on in all of my free time, Meg,
Yes.
is this notion of lifelong learning. It's a discussion we've had for, I think, a long time within the field of higher education. But as I embark within a new institute, we need to figure out how do we train this, how do we ensure the built capacity amongst all of our institutes. It's not about building the biggest office of sustainability, but it's about building the capacity and ongoing building the capacity across all of the, or across many of the people at the operational level. And how do we engage faculty in that? How do we engage students? It's going to be a complex model, but when you sit down and you talk, we can't assume that everybody within our institutes knows what life cycle cost analysis is, right? But we need to. So that's just one example. So with all of the resiliency, that is the newest buzzword, and we talk about it as if everybody knows what that means. So how do we build that capacity across our institutes? What role can AASHE play in that? What role can we as sustainability directors? Oh, I have so much more, but
I bet you do.
Stop with that.
Well, it's interesting. So I've heard just a few highlights of what we're envisioning for the next 10 years, the sustainability incubators. I love that, Harold. I think that's so exciting. Ciannat, your thought about, I have this visual of, the gates around institutions of higher education and breaking down the gates, and access and affordability continuing to be more of an important topic in the next 10 years. Bearing witness, Jay. That's going to resonate with me. And Julie, partnerships and trying to make sure that we're thinking about ourselves and our campuses as creating spaces for lifelong learning. So that sounds like a great future. How do we get there? So what does that look like? What are your thoughts? What do you think when you go back to your campuses and you're envisioning these futures? What do you do on campus? Harold.
I'm going to return to sort of what David Orr talked about yesterday in terms of hope, but with a twist. And the twist is not hope as most people think of it, as this upwelling that makes us sort of, feel positive or optimistic, but sort of the Tibetan Buddhist notion of renouncing hope. Because I think what our higher education institutions have really been about is this notion that we prepare people for change. We prepare people to become these change agents, but we don't do it ourselves. We stay just the way we are. And so it goes to that Buddhist notion of renunciation of hope and also fear. So we, as individuals and as institutions, really need to become fearless. We need to address the despair and tragedy that's associated with the loss, but we need to start actually being engaged in that change ourselves. There's this famous idea called the Stockdale paradox. Why is it that when someone is faced with these tremendously adverse conditions, like Stockdale, who was the most senior POW in the Vietnam War, how do people like Stockdale or Nelson Mandela survive those horrible conditions? Well, they renounce hope. It's not, I'm going to get out in this date or everything is going to change at this point. It's what we do every day. And so, we have this amazingly beautiful, unimaginably beautiful, wonderful world before us with life, teeming with life, even with all the tragedy and challenges before us. We need to engage with that, and we need to have that inspire us in terms of every action that we make every day. The food we eat, the clothes we wear, how we get around town, the places that we live in, and we need to bring that back to our higher education institutions. Those are the real challenges that are before us. Those are the real research opportunities. And we need to also, get rid of this notion of individualism. It's about our individual learning. Well, it's about us learning together, not just as communities, but as a species, and really tapping into that potential to address these challenges that we have. That's what improving quality of life for all and well-being is really about. And that's what our institutions should be about. It's not about helping someone to get a job. It's about helping someone to create well-being that goes well beyond our institutions.
Thank you, Harold. Ciannat.
So, just to riff on that a little bit about the fact that we won't ever have enough money, we won't ever have enough power. There are going to be a lot of we won't have enough of, but I think the secret sauce of resilience that we do have in this community that I was struck by immediately and continue to be moved by almost daily is the generosity of spirit in our community. It absolutely blows me away that I can type into the Green Schools list, we're trying to do a bike share, what do we do? And I will get back within the day the most thoughtful, sometimes 5-paragraph long with citations, kind of amazing responses of people who could be seen as competitors, people who are very busy. And that is absolutely the thing we bring. And it is so powerful. And I think is the solution and is the answer. And it goes to what Julie talked about, partnering with people you don't normally partner with. And a small story on that, I am in Georgia. We have for years had it be illegal to get solar energy financed by third parties. Miraculously, we were able to get a small exception to that through a coalition of the Tea Party Patriots of Georgia and the Sierra Club and other greenies like higher ed, and we call it the Green Tea Alliance.
Amazing.
Awesome.
Amazing.
And that kind of unlikely bedfellows, that's the way I am absolutely confident we will get there. And to Jay's point, I think, about community colleges, we have to stop pretending that we are all in the same place here. There are some higher educational institutions that are far more privileged than others. And instead of saying, my job and our job is about greening this institution and producing X number of graduates and checking off a list of things, those that are the most privileged had best share with those who are the least, and we've got to all be getting people leapfrogging because we don't have the decades to wait.
Thank you, Ciannat. Such a great story, too. Jay, your thoughts?
I'm imagining the Big Mac with the secret sauce of resilience. Well, unfortunately, I always tend to go to the tactical, so that's where I'm going to go. I think higher ed's in crisis, right? The Kubo surveys say that half of business officers believe their institutions may not be fiscally solvent in the next 15 years. So I'm going to sort of attack this from that very sort of practical angle. I think as we talk about what is the value proposition of higher education, that's where sustainability comes in, to your point earlier about the real opportunities here. And that is turning your campus into learning labs, meaningful on, the flipped classroom, right? I mean, you actually have students doing active work on your campuses. Integrate educational opportunities into your vendor RFPs. Provide every reason for your students to come to campus and have a transformative experience. We know that students that are engaged with their campuses, they persist, they succeed, they find mentors. And even to your board of directors or your president who doesn't really get sustainability, they get those things. And so, again, I'm being very sort of boring and tactical here, but over the next 10 years, I think the future of higher education is very centrally tied to sustainability out of self-preservation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you, Jay. Julie.
Trying to figure out where to squeeze between this. These are excellent responses, very thoughtful. I think one of the pieces that I know has that's emerged for me, both and reinforced with what you're all mentioning, is this revisiting our argument as to why the campus matters and continuing to come back to that. I think we should never take for granted that we've defined something or that we have an answer to something. So I think coming back to that in this new context, this notion of why the campus matters. I was in a meeting recently where that actually came up as we look to more global engagement through digital technology, because you can scale up so quickly through, through online learning mechanisms. So in that case, maybe towards what you're saying, Jay, I think this notion of why the campus matters comes at so many different levels, the physical construct to just how sustainability continues to advance the mission of the Institute and the impact of our graduates. I mean, many times over my career, people have said, why stay with higher education? You could get so much, it's so much less political and here. But I think we're all here because we know the role of higher education in society globally and the importance of that role. So I think continue to revisit that, and I think that would be an interesting exercise, maybe challenging ourselves to bring our definitions or our framings, however one wants to put that, to a year from now, to see how those evolve and how they compare. I think we could actually learn quite a bit from one another. The other piece that I think is both based on what we've learned and where we need to go, but we have to continue to find common ground. And I say that, I'm working at one of those institutions with resources, and there's still so much common ground, and I know this is probably easier for me to say from my vantage point right now, but we tend to focus on what the differences are, and I think that's one of the reasons we proliferate the incremental changes as opposed to finding the immense common ground between institutes. Resources may vary, but we're still dealing with people and politics and infrastructure. So it doesn't respond to what you're saying in terms of how I completely concur with that. And I think I have some thoughts around that. But we have to continue to find that common ground. And I think that's what's going to be the continued strength of the fabric that we've created here. So I can't tell you how many conversations from my different, opportunities where I've worked, where people tend to say, oh, you're lucky because you're here or you're there. Yes, absolutely fortunate. And I try to make sure I leverage that towards developing models or investing in how to get that information out. But I tell you, there's much more common ground between people, so point taken. And I just want to come back to, in terms of what people should go back to, there's this data piece, both quantitatively, qualitatively, ethnographically. I mean, Peggy's been talking about anthropology and ethnographic analysis of our work since the beginning. We have to come back to that, and it can no longer just be looking backwards. I mean, all of the data that I continue to hear about in these sessions today is how we did last year. And we have to have much more, and it's still reflecting one area. And I realize how difficult this is. I don't have the answer for how just to do this, but I'm convinced, and I'm being more and more exposed to how you can collect data through sensing, through really thinking more integrated models. So one piece to go back with is to figure that out. And I think that's something that I know I can contribute moving forward, but let's tackle it together.
Yeah. It would be so nice if there was sort of this simple checklist of just do this step 1 through 10, and then you'll be here. You'll be at this future that you guys have just described. For those of you that came expecting that, my apologies. But
can we talk about pedagogy just real quickly?
Please.
Return to your point about pedagogy. Okay, here's the dilemma. You all want to go carbon neutral, right?
Sounds great.
Go all online right now. Boom! Solar panels, you're done. How many of you want that to be your institution of higher education? I mean, so that's an incredibly sort of obvious, blunt discussion of some of the dilemmas we face. You can go carbon neutral and have the worst university in the world.
That's a good point.
Sorry.
So I'm thinking about the next 10 years, the vision that we want to achieve, how we get there. The folks that are in the audience here, what would you challenge them to do? They go back to their campuses, they've heard your ideas, this nice vision. I'm sure many of you have your own ideas as to what the future of campus sustainability should look like in the next 10 years. What would you say to the folks here in the next AASHE year? What would you say? Come back with this. Make sure you have this discussion on your campus. What would you challenge them with? Julie, let's start with you.
Well, everything I just said.
Yeah.
Why the campus matters, the role of data, think really about organizational transformation. The piece where I've reconnected with some old colleagues is starting to frame what we mean by what I mean and what we mean as a field potentially by next generation sustainability, so that it enables us to be in the moment, in the present moment about what we've been doing, but something that, whether that's the right framing or not, that really keeps that conversation alive. So it's so easy to get mired down in the day-to-day, and really rethinking what do we want this next generation of sustainability professionals and of our campuses to look like.
Jay, your scarf is rubbing against the microphone.
Got it. Excuse me, I'm sorry.
I was looking like, who's the heavy breather?
All
They found me.
I'll take that one.
I'd have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for those kids. I think maybe you should invite these three to come to your campuses and give inspirational talks. I think that would be
a great start.
A good start.
Jay, yourself included.
I think this is going to be. I'm Captain Obvious here again, but I think over the next year, you all need to be happy warriors. I mean, just keep at it because you don't have a choice. We don't have a choice. And look into your students' eyes and look into your children's eyes and understand those are the stakes. And, fight the good fight. And understand you have colleagues and you have friends and you have a community and they're all around you. And celebrate that. Whenever you get that dumb memo from HR like I got yesterday, you just, you commiserate with friends and talk about the big plans and talk about how do you make the green island of privilege less isolated. And you do the work.
Ciannat.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it. As I said, our strength is our community. So when I started almost a decade ago, there were a few people. Julie was one of them, Dee Dee DeLongpre, Dave Newport. I mean, it's all those folks have been in this forever who were so generous with me and said, how can I help you? And gave me everything I needed in terms of their knowledge, their time, their energy, their hopefulness. And that's, I think, what we just have to go and do more of, is not think about, I have got so much to do, because we all do, but think more about, how can I help you? How can we help each other? Because we have got a very short period of time when we collectively have to do a whole lot. And I really don't want to see a lot of people spending a ton of energy setting up programs that may be more appropriate in some institutions more than others. Do you know what I mean? Like, we have to break down old rivalries. I mean, you can say that's easy. There's no football at Emory. You don't understand rivalry. Maybe I don't. But I think it would be great to call your biggest competitor and say, how can we help each other? Or today, before you leave this room, turn to the person next to you, whether you know them or not, and say, how can I help you? Because that, I really think, is the magic of what we do. And AASHE is such, I mean, we all come here because the minute we come to this conference every year, we feel so much a part of something so big. And it's hard to keep that going all the time. But that, I think, is what we need to do next.
Thank you, Ciannat.
Well, it's hard to add anything meaningful onto that, but I'll try. I think I'd start with what you do every moment of every day matters. Seneca wrote this beautiful piece called On the Shortness of Life, and I'm not going to talk about it, but I encourage you all to go read it. And so what most of us do, what I spend a lot of time doing every day, is trying to help people play nice in the sandbox. And I think reinforcing the really positive things that people who are trying to play nice in this sandbox are doing every day matters, tremendously. And when people behave poorly, what I call maladaptive behaviors that are inimical to the common good, let them know about it. Let them know about it first with sense of humor and joy and grace and kinds of ways that joy is, we're being encouraged by Jay tonight, or today to think about. But sometimes, you may need to be a little bit more abrupt with sharing that, because we need to go back to that kind of Gandhian notion of being the change that we seek. And that starts with all of you asking the really big, deep, important questions. It goes back to that notion of what we could be doing, and Julie alluded to, is just being less unsustainable. And less unsustainable is not getting us on that path of sustainability, which is creating the world, of delight and joy and wonder, with a lot of tough stuff, along the way. So Seneca is talking about that in in that piece called On the Shortness of Life. We give our life energy, which we don't get back away very, very easily. What most of us do is pour out our hearts and souls to try to create this more sustainable world in ways that are really, really unsustainable. Julie was talking about that a little bit with Dallas this morning. So think about how every action you take really does matter every single day. And focus it on those big questions, those leverage points that are going to help create the world that we all really want.
Thank you, Harold. And thanks to our panelists. A couple of thoughts before we have to close today. This is the start of a conversation, right? So there is no map that says this is exactly where we need to go in the next 10 years. And in fact, AASHE actually over the past 10 years has sort of been deliberate at not wanting to be overly prescriptive. You have to start with recycling, then move to energy conservation, blah, blah, blah. Right, we want to provide, and STAR is really sort of like this framework that says, here's sort of the ideally everything that needs to be done in terms of your institution to operate and sort of incorporate sustainability into the academics, research, administration, et cetera. But it's up for the institution to decide, well, what are our priorities, right? And I think this conversation, it's not just about where should AASHE be in 10 years. It's about our movement and higher education and how do we advance sustainability in higher education collectively. When I think about where we're going to be next year, and hopefully we'll have another conversation like this, I hope to hear from you between now and then as to, you go back to your campuses and maybe have the same conversation. Where do we want to be in 10 years? I look forward to hearing those answers and figuring out and hearing from you, this is what we need from AASHE in order to get there. This is what we need from the community in order to get there. And I think collectively, we'll be able to come up with this vision as well as a strategy for how we can actually achieve it. So with that, I want to thank our panelists today for a great conversation. Thank you all for being here. Have a great rest of your morning. Great job to you all. Thank you.